The most common New Testament word for sin is hamartia. See above parabasis. Trespass or transgression literally means to step across the line. One who steps over a property line has trespassed on another person's land. The person who steps across Yahuwah's standard of righteousness has committed a trespass or transgression. Anomia means lawlessness or iniquity, and is a rather general description of sinful acts, referring to almost any action in opposition to Yahuwah's standard of righteousness. Poneria, evil or wickedness, is even a more general term than anomia. Adikia, unrighteousness, is just the opposite of righteous. In forensic context outside the New Testament, it described one who was on the wrong side of the law. Katharsia, uncleanness or impurity, was a cultic word used to describe anything which could cause cultic impurity. It was used quite often to describe vicious acts or sexual sins. Apistia, unbelief, literally refers to a lack of faith. To refuse to accept the truth of Yahuwah by faith is to sin. Hence, any action which can be construed as unfaithful or any disposition which is marked by a lack of faith is sinful. Epithemia, often translated lust, is actually a neutral word. Only the context can determine if the desire is good or evil. Yahushua said, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Luke 22, verse 15. Paul uses this word with a modifier meaning evil in Colossians 3, verse 5, where it is translated evil concupiscence or evil desires. When used in this way, the word could refer to almost any evil desire, but was most often used to describe sexual sins. Matthew 5, verse 28. Sin's consequences. The Torah Bible looks upon sin in any form as the most serious of humanity's problems. Though sinful acts may be directed against another person, ultimately every sin is against Yahuwah, the creator of all things. Perfect in righteousness, Yahuwah cannot tolerate that which violates his righteous character. Therefore, sin creates a barrier between Yahuwah and persons. Sin also necessitates Yahuwah's intervention in human affairs. Since humanity could not extricate itself from the entanglements of sin, it was necessary for Yahuwah to intervene if humanity was ever to be freed from these entanglements. C. Salvation. The consequences of sin, both personally and in society, are far-reaching. That person who constantly and consistently follows a sinful course will become so enmeshed in sin that for all practical purposes he or she is enslaved to sin. Romans 6, for example. Another of the awful consequences of sin is spiritual depravity in society in general as well as in the lives of individuals. Some will argue that depravity is the cause of sin, and this surely is a valid consideration. However, there can be no escaping the fact that a continuance in sin adds to this personal depravity, a moral crookedness or corruption, eventually making it impossible to reject sin. Sin also produces spiritual blindness. Spiritual truths simply are not visible to that person who has been blinded by sin. Moral ineptitude is another devastating consequence of sin. The more people practice sin, the more inept they become as far as moral and spiritual values are concerned. Eventually, sin blurs the distinction between right and wrong. Guilt is certainly a consequence of sin. No person can blame another person for a sin problem. Each person must accept responsibility for sin and face the guilt associated with it. Romans 1 through 3. In the Bible, sin and death are corollaries. One of the terrible byproducts of sin is death. Continual, consistent sin will bring spiritual death to that person who has not come under the lordship of Messiah through repentance and faith. Romans 6 verse 23, Revelation 20 verse 14. For those who have trusted Messiah Yahushua for salvation, death no longer holds this dread. Messiah has negated the power of Satan, Hasatan, in making death horrible, and has freed the person from slavery to this awful fear. Hebrews 2 verses 14 through 15. See death. Another serious consequence of sin is that it brings separation from Yahuwah, estrangement, and a lack of fellowship with Yahuwah. This need not be permanent, but if a person dies not having corrected this problem by trusting Messiah, then his separation does become permanent. Romans 6 verse 23. See hell. Sin produces estrangement from other persons just as surely as it produces an estrangement from Yahuwah. All interpersonal problems have sin as their root cause. James 4 verse 1 through 3. The only hope for peace to be achieved on either the personal or national level is through the Prince of Peace.